Hi, and welcome back to Continual. It's another episode of Hot Off the Press, the show about new releases and the artists that bring them to you. But before we go too far down the path tonight, I'm Jim Nettles, and I'll be your host. Let's make our way around the room and see who all is joining us. So, JD, we'll let you go first.
I'm JD Light. I write romance. I don't really know.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write historical fantasy and paranormal male-female romance set in southern Georgia, along with a couple of other subgenres of romance and science fiction.
Bobby?
Hi, I'm Bobby Nash. I write a lot. I write a little bit of everything, but I do a lot of crime fiction and thrillers. I like to kill people, usually in the most violent ways possible. So,
Glenn?
Hi, I'm Glenn Parris. I write science fiction. I write mystery. I write paranormal vampire stories, and I write some historical fiction. My upcoming book is Dragon's Heir out of Outland Entertainment, coming May 4th.
And Beth?
Hi, I'm Beth Bolden. I write contemporary gay romance. I also write a little bit of fantasy gay romance. I have written one and I have another one coming out in a couple months. So that's really exciting. I also don't kill anybody ever. So I think Bobby's got that covered.
I got your bit covered too. Yeah, I kill enough for the both of us. We're good.
To be honest, I did kill 26 people in my first mystery novel, so I'm up there.
I like how you've counted, Glenn. You know exactly your body count.
Only 26?
Only 26.
Well, it was his first book.
It was pointed out. I said, no, I didn't kill that many. And then someone counted them up. I said, holy crap. It's like,
that's hilarious.
I did.
Bobby usually does that in the first scene.
I remember one time a fan of mine came up to me and says, do you realize that someone dies in everything you've written? And I'm like, no. And then I went and looked and I went, damn. So I purposefully wrote something where nobody died, and it really confused people.
I feel like an amateur.
Well, JD, let's find out a little bit about your newest offering. What tell us a little bit about it.
It is called Scalded. Well, actually, Scalded will be coming out sometime. It was supposed to be out by now. That was actually supposed to be what I was talking about tonight, but it's not ready. So Scorched is the one that came out in January, and it is a dragon paranormal romance. It has a man named Aiden who his mom was killed in front of him by a dragon. He's human, and so he has learned to fight dragons, and he is trying to find his mom's killer, but he meets Dukes, and he is a dragon, and they fall in love.
How about you, Nancy?
I love those titles.
Thanks.
That'll be a hot time in the town for. So,
Are we to me?
well, yes, we are.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
I can come up with another bad joke if we need to.
Well, my latest release is Renegade Mage at the time we are recording this. And I'm really excited about it because the first 3 books in this series, which I call the Light Mage Wars, were originally published by another publisher under another name. And the rights reverted to me, and I've rebranded them and am re-releasing them at intervals this year. Renegade Mage is I don't really like the term, but it's pretty descriptive, bad boy, good girl romance. Griffin was the top cop of the Southeastern mages, and if you're not familiar with that term, think wizards. And he kept leading his mages to raid the nests of their deadly enemies, the ghouls, who are dark magic users and prey on mages and humans. And there kept being more people there than they expected, and his deputies kept getting killed. And so 6 years ago, for reasons that I don't want to spoil before people read it, he blew away the chief counselor of the Collegium, which is what they call their organization, fought his way out. People were killed. He's the top of the most wanted list in the mage world. And the heroine, Valeria, is the sheriff of the mages now, the Shire Reeve or sheriff. And she and Griffin meet through circumstances neither one of them could ever have anticipated. And she begins to see that there was more to his story than she thought, that things have perhaps not been presented accurately in the wider world. And so the story is the two of them dealing with that and with ghouls doing something that's summoning normal humans or mundanes. And yes, I borrowed that term from fandom. And it's action adventure. It's fairly hot romance, although, not right away because the way they get started. And I'm really excited about it.
All right, Bobby, who'd we kill this week?
Well, this one, my latest release is 17 years in the making. I know that you talk about how quick I put things out. This one, my first novel that was published in 2005 was Evil Ways, which I have the poster here on the back wall. Finally, 17 years later, we have the sequel for various reasons, but Evil Intent has come out. These are crime thrillers that focus on a FBI agent. Evil Ways, he's dealing with a serial killer. I always tell people it's like, imagine John McClane found himself in a horror movie. Evil Intent takes place. It was originally supposed to take place a short time later, but because it's taken me so long, I did bump up the number of years between them. And now they're dealing with a domestic terrorist. So it's still has that thriller aspect to it, but not as much the horror as the first one had. And so a lot of fun. It was like I said, it took me a while for various reasons. It kept going on the shelf and for a lot of behind the scenes reasons, and then get busy and you just don't catch up. But I'm excited that it's finally out. It's it was very popular when the first one came out. So I've had a lot of people have been haranguing me for the last 17 years wanting to know when the next one's out. So finally.
Please tell me after 17 years you worked in the line. I'm too old for this.
I did work in a line because where I stopped, because it went a few years, I was just doing other stuff. They were in the middle of something, and I do have one character comment. It feels like we've been at this for years. Just because I thought that was funny.
So, Glenn, let's find out about your dragons.
Right. So my dragon story is a little bit offbeat. It's not what you expect. Imagine that human evolution was not set on course by ancient aliens, but by ancient astronauts. Imagine that they left behind a dying world where dinosaurs were the wildlife and mammals were the pests. Imagine that they escaped when the meteor hit and took off and settled other places in the galaxy. Now, imagine in 1996, a cosmic pandemic, work that in, drove them back to the point of origin, back to the place that they left, back home, Earth. Dragon was a messiah, not a species, and he helped rejuvenate the Earth. Imagine their surprise when their mission, desperate as it is, arrives and they find that the world has been overrun by mammals that have evolved to look like them. This is a story that could only be told by an archaeologist. The beautiful Vitna is the point of view character in Dragon's Heir. And we are the heirs of Dragon. And that's it.
How about you, Beth?
So my newest release is called Ride or Die, and this is the sixth and last Food Truck Warriors book. So this is a contemporary gay romance. I have no dragons. I have no attacking people. I have no dying. I have just two characters who have kind of been dancing around each other for a number of books. I introduced one of the characters, Ren, as he's called. He hates his name Lorenzo, so he likes to go by Ren. He is of the I only have one night stands, not because he has some big sad story. He he just really is just not interested in attachments. And he kind of runs into one of the friends of another character who runs a security company. He's ex-military, and he's looking for a relationship. And immediately they're attracted to each other, but they want two completely different things. And it's a very character-driven story about discovering that sometimes change can be good and that compromise is great. And sometimes you just need to talk to somebody. You know, it's a very emotional, intimate story. And it was also really fun because I never intended to write this book. I intended to write 4 Food Truck Warriors books, and somehow it became 6. But I'm not doing any more. I have written a lot of food books, so I'm kind of like, I feel like everyone's sort of fooded out at this point.
Tomorrow she'll get an idea for book number 7.
I've run out of good titles. All of my Food Truck Warriors are like fun plays on like driving. Like the first one's called Drive Me Crazy, and then it's Hit the Brakes. And coming up with 2 additional after I was already done was really difficult. And I really liked the Ride or Die title originally, and I was like, oh, but everyone's going to think it's about murder, which knowing you guys probably would be about murder. But yeah, it's more of a friends romance for life, Ride or Die, not actual die. So it's a really fun, sweet.
Tell me you're not going to give that up before you come up with Roadkill as a title.
I am going to give it up before I use Roadkill. I'm going to break it to you. That doesn't really fill people with like the sweet, sexy romance feeling. You know, it just kind of is gross. So
this will be the spin-off series.
Yeah. After they've been together 10 years and then the fighting starts, you know.
Absolutely. That's hilarious. I'm going to have to do a flash forward. Maybe I'll save it for the box set, a special story, Roadkill.
Yeah. Welcome to the dark side, Beth.
Exciting. I'm writing a follow-up to my fantasy, and I'm just about finished. I'm doing the final battle, and I am going to kill someone for the first time. So I just want to tell you guys that, you know, you'd be so proud of me that we're going to be writing a death scene tomorrow. So I feel properly inspired now.
Make sure it's well overacted.
I'm going to go there. So.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the books. Settings, the environment, all that kind of good stuff. So when readers come in, I know a lot of you guys do a lot of world building around these stories. And I mean, even the nice, coziest, sweetest romance, it's still at the end of the day about what's the environment you're putting your characters in, what's the place they get to go, what kind of, what do they get to do? So Nancy, with the world that you've got that you're pulling them in, you talked a little bit about the unseemly execution of somebody by your main character and the setup that happens, but talk a little bit more about the world that you're bringing them into and why there's a swamp maybe behind you.
Well, the swamp behind me is there because the Okefenokee plays a role to some extent in each of the books. When we were brainstorming these books, and Renegade Mage is the second book published, but it was actually the first book written and the first book sold under the title of Renegade, I wanted to write it set in the South because I know the South. I've lived my whole life in the South. I didn't want to use Atlanta because so many people were using Atlanta as a fantasy setting. And when I was in second grade, we stopped on our way back from visiting my dad's brother's family in Florida at the Okefenokee Swamp Park. Now, literally all I remembered about it was the name and the swamp park. And I remembered that we could not go for a ride in a boat because my mother was afraid a snake would fall out of the trees into the boat and then we would have to deal with it. I assume that now as an adult, the professional guide would have dealt with it, but okay. Anyway, I mentioned this in the brainstorming group, and one of the women said, well, the energy is different in a swamp. And we're looking at magic. Energy plays into it in different ways. And so I set Renegade in a small imaginary town near the Okefenokee Swamp because the magic system is the main thing that I constructed. It's set in contemporary southern Georgia, aside from things like the Mage's Base, the Collegium, and the imaginary little town. So I hadn't been there. since I was like 7 or 8. And there's only so much research you can do off the internet. So I kept it kind of to a minimum in that first book. There was a scene like on the edge of the swamp, and not a whole lot else that figured into that. So we were on our way back from Florida, and we stopped and went to what's called now the eastern side, the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. And I remember driving in with my husband and son, and the book had been sold. It was coming out at that point. And I said to them, I really hope this is as cool as I think it is, because I'm stuck with it now. And I am here to tell you, I am not nature woman. Anybody who knows me will tell you that I like my surroundings climate controlled and my wildlife safely distant. But I fell in love with that place. It was like an alien landscape. It's not really a swamp, it's a blackwater peat bog. And when the water is still, it's perfectly reflective of everything that's up above it. Cypress trees all over, dripping with Spanish moss. We were there during actually a drought, which inspired one of the other books in the series, because there had been a big wildfire in the swamp that burned for months. Alligators were following the tour boat. So you could see their snouts and their heads and their eyes. And the guide said that the propellers on the tour boat churn up the water and churn up the fish. So it's like a buffet for the alligators. So they follow along and get a snack when the tourists go into the swamp. So I thought it was just kind of a nice, spooky, different kind of setting. I don't think most romance readers, and I say that as a romance reader, want to read a book about people slogging through a swamp and fighting alligators most of the time. But I do think it's kind of atmospheric with the trees and the black water and the Spanish moss. So I've kind of used it to put some atmosphere in the books more than as a major location for the action in the books, because I just think that the audience these books are named at probably would not especially like a book that takes place mostly slogging through a swamp. I wouldn't, frankly, even though I love the swamp.
Well, just remember, The Princess Bride, a lot of it happened in the swamp.
And look what happened to them.
So Bobby,
dollars.
So Bobby, now number one, you've got a whole brand new idea on how to get rid of the body.
That's right. Yes.
So
yes, I've been to my fair share of swamps. They're always good for that.
So I'm assuming that the terrorism does not happen in Nakatomi Plaza.
No. This is when I created Evil Ways, I created this small town called Summersville, which I still use in the Snow and the Sheriff Myers book. And it does make a brief appearance in Evil Intent. But this time I actually said it, because in the first one, it's an FBI agent who's dealing with something that doesn't have anything to do with his job. This one, he's actually doing his job. And so, they are chasing down these bad guys. So it takes them from Washington, D.C. into the Tennessee mountains, where part of it is set. Then back to Washington, D.C. There's a little bit of it set in California. There's a little bit of it set in Georgia. So there's a lot of that bouncing around. And most of the places I had visited, so I had like an idea. I've never been to Washington, D.C. I've driven past it on the expressway, but that's as good as I've got. So all of my Washington, D.C. knowledge came from Google or movies. So it's probably very inaccurate, but it was still, tropes to play with. But I did, in terms of coming up with good places, because I had this idea of sitting at, they storm this compound where this farmhouse where the villains are held up. And I had written it, but we took a family trip. It was a train tour, and the train went along the river up from Georgia, up along the Toccoa River, up into Tennessee. And so while we were there, I noticed all these, that like on one side of the train is the river, on the other side is like a cliff, and it's pockmarked with stairs that crisscross from the houses up there where people can walk down to the river. And so using that became a very integral part to the story, because I just loved the look of it. that I went back and incorporated that into the story. So a lot of the atmosphere of that place came from me just seeing it and going, ooh, this is cool. And I'd like to set something here. So that made the town come alive a little for me. So, but like I said, with Washington, I faked it.
Well, it fits for DC.
Yeah. You know,
So how about you, Glenn? I mean, especially since we're going back a few million years.
Yeah, I had a lot of space to play in. My story starts out in a very mundane way. It starts out in a little town in northern Maine called Howard Cove, where these two people, I'll call them people, recognize that something big is coming, and they hope they've prepared the human race for it, but they're not sure. We find that they have led secret societies through the ages, the Illuminati, all kinds of secret societies, the Masons, etc., in preparation for what was coming. What was coming were the Ifalu. These were people who lived alongside the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Due to an industrial accident, a meteor struck the Earth. They were able to evacuate. And, maybe this is the source of the Noah's Ark myths, that they took enough wildlife to repopulate, but they didn't take everybody, particularly not the vermin that they left behind. Only one species decided that they were going to stay behind, and those were the people of Dragon. And they felt that the Earth needed a second chance, and that they would try to repopulate the Earth with whatever life was left behind. And that was us. We were the survivors. Fast forward 65 million years, and these people find themselves fighting an incurable pandemic, a cosmic pandemic. And they backtrack along the exodus pathway that they took so many thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, and they can't find any viable algae that's untainted until they get all the way back to Earth. And lo and behold, they come back on an expedition just to get a bucket of algae. And they find that there are buildings everywhere, there are airplanes in the sky, trains on the ground, boats and ships in the ocean, and they're all manned and created by mammals, what they used to call vermin. These were pests. How could they evolve to look like them? And of course, curiosity killed the cat, and it also got these dinosaurs into trouble. They get stranded without a lot of their technology, and they get into a battle of wits. And we're in a battle of wits with the apex predators with 65 million years more experience than we have. So it's sort of an interesting little contest. Even if they're unarmed, they're more dangerous than anything we've ever faced. And of course, there's got to be a little romance in it. I can't get away without writing a little romance into my stories. The archaeologist, this beautiful woman, is the love interest of the leader of this mission. And he's, of course, almost invulnerable. He's like the Hulk meets Batman kind of a character. And his only weakness is her. And she, of course, gets captured. And she learns so much from us, but she's in constant danger, and she's jeopardizing his mission. So there's a little bit of a ticking time bomb with trying to get her out of danger. But she's an endearing character. She's a little bit of an aristocrat. She's a little naive. She's a little pompous. She's certainly privileged. And her interaction with human beings is fascinating.
How about you, Beth? And I've got to ask, how'd you decide to pick food trucks and food truck wars as the background?
Well, so I actually wrote another series that was called Kitchen Gods, which was about 4 friends that all worked at this high-end restaurant in Napa, California. And so that's a complete series. The last book came out in 2019. And then I knew I wanted to do a spinoff because one of the characters' brothers in Kitchen Gods had shown up and they had talked about buying a food truck. And I thought, this will be easier because writing about chefs was really hard because they work like 18-hour days. 6 days a week. There's no time for romance if you're a really high-end chef. So I thought, oh, food trucks, that'll be easier. That's more casual, relaxed. Yeah, but they're still basically, they're the only person in the truck. So they also work a lot. But that was why I decided to do food trucks. So Food Truck Warriors is actually the name of the community. So in the second book, they actually open what would be considered a food truck lot. So it's an LGBT friendly lot. It's in kind of sort of industrial gentrifying Los Angeles. And I based it, I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, on the 1,000 food truck lots that we have there. So they have like evening music, they have a stage, they have special events. And it's been really fun to like use that setting and also the community that's been built, because there's like all these books now. And so there's all these characters that will show up. In this particular book, it kind of comes into play. So they actually have a copycat that's threatening to show up nearby, a rich lawyer who's kind of bored with his life, and he decides that this is what he wants for himself, is to build another food truck lot. And it's kind of more of a comedic thing, because he and the lead character of Driving Me Crazy, who is one of the main characters in the first book, are like twins. Like they are very similar. And so like everyone is talking the whole book about when the two of them are going to meet, like the universe is going to explode. And they end up deciding to like, basically become friends with this guy. And instead of like trying to scare him away, like basically it further enhances the community aspect of the book. They basically form an association and they become friends with him. So I actually did write him because I thought, well, I don't ever want to close the door completely. So I could write another series with this guy, which of course everyone picked up on. My alpha reader was like, you really can't write this guy this way if you don't want people to ask. And I'm like, well, it's a nice backdoor. If I need it, it's there. If I never do use it, it's great. But I really thought it was a good illustration of like really what the people had built in that community, which is, friendship first, loyalty first, acceptance for everybody. And, it's been really fun to do that. It was so fun to come up with all the different food trucks and the food that they served, and to come up with like different events that they'd hold. In the fifth book, they have this whole contest on National Waffle Day where each truck has a special waffle dish that they make based on the theme of their truck. And then there's like a contest with whoever like has the most social media hashtags wins like this prize. It was just a super fun challenge. And so I enjoy that. So many of my readers tell me like the thing I want most is to be able to go to Food Truck Warriors. And I was like, well, it doesn't actually exist, but there is probably a food truck lot in your community, because they're definitely growing in popularity.
And the special edition that'll be coming out will feature all the recipes from the series.
I was about to say it.
I have actually. So I do like cooking live demonstrations in my group, and I will cook recipes from the book, and I have recipe cards I give out as swag. And I am going to do a cookbook probably later this year. So that's going to be a special gift for my readers.
I sense a book, like a food truck book signing in your future.
Good. I should make that as a whole event. Yeah, that would be really neat.
Travel the country in a food truck and do signings out of the back. And you'll get home in 2 years. How about you, JD? Tell us a little bit about the world you've set up.
Okay, so I am really horrible at this, you guys. I'm sorry. I will probably try to keep this short and sweet because it is really tough doing this. But so honestly, whenever I finished with my last series, I was ready to start a new one. Wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I knew it would probably be paranormal because that's what my readers really seem to gravitate towards. So I did a poll, and I did like a form and put all these ideas out there and just really had people vote. So mine was a little easier to put together because I had lots of background noise to help me. But the setting is actually just kind of rural Minnesota. It is a fictitious town, and it is like what my dragons call their like group or pack or whatever is a queen. And this queen, there's several queens, but this queen is just smack dab in the middle of nowhere, and hard to find, not really on the grid, which helps, with keeping them hidden, because they are not known to humans. There's like a little community, pretty much. There's restaurants, and it's more of an eating hall type situation, and almost castle-esque, but and then there are several small towns close by, and that's usually where the unexpected happens, is when it's not in the safety of the queue. The first book is Scorched. There's a prequel called Burned, and that is in the Your Book Boyfriend's Boyfriend giveaway. Sorry, lost my train of thought for a second. Scorched is mostly takes place at the Kuhn. There is a warehouse where in the beginning, the human captures the tribute, which is like the leader of the dragons, and he is trying to get information out of him, but things go a little wonky. It's a impreg book, so basically it starts a heat and things happen.
Well, if things don't happen, there's no book.
That's right.
And then your dragons have no heat.
That's right.
Well, let's talk a little more about who we're going to get to meet and who we're going to get to play with here in the stories. And so, Bobby, do you want to dive into your hero, or do you want to dive into your bad guy?
I guess we can start with our hero. Evil Intent and Evil Ways. The main character is FBI agent Harold Palmer, which is the character that made me realize you've got to Google names before you create them, because Michael Caine played a very famous Harry Palmer, and thank God because for no reason whatsoever it didn't feel right calling him Harry, so I never call him Harry. So there's at least that little bit of distinction. Harold is he's an FBI agent. He's a profiler. Works on he works on a task force. He's not like an action hero in terms of he's not the guy that's out there running guns blazing most of the time, but he keeps getting thrown into these situations where things like that kind of end up happening to him. And so I like the idea of seeing this everyman kind of in these situations where he's not Superman. He's not always right. He doesn't always know all the answers. And at the end of Evil Ways, something happens to him that has a profound effect on him that even 6 years later in the sequel, he's still dealing with. He runs into, so of course I throw him in a situation where that will come up again, put him in that situation and no, he doesn't want to be in. So, but he's a family man. He's married. He has a child. He's been in his career a long time. He's very good at his job. So he's just like that. He's just a working stiff whose job is just to hunt down bad guys. So that was fun. So I like him. He's a very, very affable, playful guy. He has a brother who lives in Somersville, and part of the first book was the two brothers reconnecting and dealing with that. So I kind of have there's a little personal bit in that, because of the two brothers, to write them well, I gave one of them my personality and one of them my brother's, and that helped them play off of each other. And so what the brothers in the new one, just a very little bit, but there's still that little bit of back and forth between them. And so it made, it's very personal to me because of that connection with my brother. And so that was fun to play with. The villain in the new one is a domestic terrorist. And when I started writing this in the late 90s. So I started writing this like pre 9/11, then after I sold Evil Ways in 2004, my original publishing experience was not a pleasant one. And part of the contract was they had the first right to any sequel. And I said, well, there's no way in hell they're getting my sequel, which is part of the reason it took me 17 years to write the darn thing. So when I went back and started working on it again, there were a lot of changes that happened between 1999, and 2019 when I went back to work on it. The world is a vastly different place, and how we look at terrorism in general, or domestic terrorism in particular, has changed. So there was a lot of rewriting and reevaluating. There was even a moment where I considered, do I even want to try to tell this story now? But I found the villain so compelling that I just, I didn't want to. I felt it would cheapen it if I tried to turn him into something else. And so playing with terrorism was that was probably the parts that gave me the biggest headaches in writing it was, am I being cliche, or am I being, because obviously in the last 20 years, terrorism is front and center in TV shows, movies, a lot more than it used to be before. And so I wanted to make sure I was not falling into stereotypical stuff, which actually worked better, because I think it made the villain more interesting to me, because he was not doing the things I've seen every villain on 24 do, or that kind of thing. And so so it was a lot of fun to do it that way, and then having the two characters, the hero and the villain, how they play off of each other, and especially when they do come face to face, how it impacts everything. So, because I always like to start with character. To me, character comes before the story. I think, a lot of times, what's the old saying? Story is what happens when you put characters in a plot. So I always start with the characters and then say, okay, if I drop them in this plot, what happens? And so, because I've known certainly the Harold and the other good guy characters from the first book, dropping him into this plot kind of angled it in a direction. So so it was pretty cool. It's fun.
How about you, Glenn? Oh, sorry, Bob.
That's okay. I was gonna say I was very proud of it. I'm very happy. It's almost like revisiting old friends. I mean, we've all done series. I guess we all probably know that it's that feeling of revisiting, buddies you haven't seen in a while.
The voices you haven't let talk in your head for a couple of weeks.
Exactly.
How about you, Glenn? Who do we get to meet?
Well, you get to meet my main character, Vitna. And as I said, she's a bit of an aristocrat. She's got a trade that is useless in her society. The Ifalu have over 65 million years of detailed records. So, what use is an archaeologist? It's a hobby. It's not a profession in her world. She gets to go because of her station in life as an aristocrat. She's essentially royal family of her species in the realm that make up the Ifalu of 400 different species that originated on Earth. The head of the expedition is Tur. This is her love interest or paramour. He unwittingly ends up bringing her out. I don't know if anybody can you see that? No, maybe not. Okay. Wow. So much for the background. But he lets her onto the mission sort of against his better judgment. And of course, she gets in a position where she's in danger, and of course she gets captured, and he has to try to get her back. She is not a damsel in distress, as we learn. She's actually quite handy. handling herself and gathering information. And she has no fear or intent of having him sacrifice the mission to save her. But she intends to get out and she intends to leave. The antagonist in the story is a rogue colonel who finds that he's got this, what he thinks is an alien with incredible knowledge and physiologic talent that he's never seen in any species on Earth. And he figures that he's going to capitalize on it. And I kind of picture him as being sort of a Dennis Miller kind of character. Just kind of smug, kind of devious, always looking at the angles. I mean, he's really gotten this plan down pat on how he's going to, capitalize on her genetics. But it's sort of a warm story from the standpoint of Tur and Vitna. You get some of the space opera stuff. You certainly get a lot of intrigue. There's a little bit of humor in it. And you have these sort of X-File quality people behind the curtain that are always sort of lurking and manipulating things. So I think it hits a lot of buttons in the genre of both science fiction and fantasy, although it leans more towards science fiction because most of it is actually based on true biology, chemistry, physics, astrophysics, etc.
Beth? So who do we get to know a little bit better as
So the main character, one of the main characters is named, like I said, his name's Ren, short for Lorenzo. He and his cousin Gabriel run this food truck that basically serves their Nana's meatball and sauce recipe. They make meatball sandwiches and other Italian delicacies. Their whole family runs a bunch of restaurants in the Napa area. And so they came down to LA to work together because they got really tired of Gabriel's overbearing older brother. And so they worked together in the food truck. Gabriel was one of the main characters in the third book. And that's when I introduced Ren. And at first he was just kind of a fun character to write because he was like the opposite. Like Ren calls Gabe the king of feelings and he's very emotive. And Ren thinks feelings are kind of crap. And he hasn't really had any relationships, but he's not really interested in them. And then, of course, he meets the one person that makes him think that he might want to reconsider. But it's very upsetting to him because he's never had anyone resist him before. He kind of is. He's very attractive and he knows it, but it's not really ego. He doesn't mind poking fun at himself, but he knows just how hot he is. And so it's like very, very frustrating that he has this guy that he wants to sleep with that won't sleep with him. And so they go on this like back and forth thing for like 6 months. And then, he has this whole thing. Oh, I've never asked anyone to sleep with me a second time. And then he does a second time. And then, Seth turns him down. And this is like unbelievable to him. And so they kind of start this very much back and forth thing. Seth is the other character. Like I said, he's ex-military, so he's been out for a while. He was a SEAL team member with the other character that was one of the other military characters that was in the series, and they run like a security business. They do a lot of private security. They're in LA. There's a lot of celebrities. So he has. It was really interesting because my alpha reader, she was in the Navy. And we talked a lot about, PTSD, obviously, and like every time you have like an ex-military character, how are you going to address that? Do they have PTSD? How does it manifest? And we talked a lot about that. And I didn't want it to be, not that there's anything against like, the traditional PTSD symptoms, a backfire of a car and the guy ducks. And, but we really focused on when he was in the military, when he was leading his team, everybody listened to him because he knew exactly the rules of the scenario and how to control the situation around him. and then he gets out and becomes a civilian, and no one gives a crap what he has to say. And so that can be really, and he can't control the situation around him anymore. One of the reasons how he controls the situation is he sets the guidelines with his relationship with Ren, and he says, we're not just going to do like a one and done thing. That's not what I'm interested in. He is genuinely looking for a real long-term relationship, and he bends a few rules to get there. It was super fun to write such different people, especially because I specifically did not want to write Ren as the kind of character who had been burned by love terribly and then never wanted to love again. Like, I really didn't want that to be the reason. And you don't actually find out for, spoiler alert, most of the book, that like there is no big, deep, dark, horrible secret that he had. Just, he started out doing things one way and it's worked well for him so far until he reached the one person that it doesn't work very well with. And so it was really entertaining to write him. And as soon as he showed up on the page in the third book, everyone was like, you have to write his book. Probably because he basically said that falling in love was total crap and nobody should ever want to do it. And when I had him write that, I actually thought to myself, there's no way I'm going to get away with not changing his mind. And that was what I had to do. So it was just a super fun, interesting book to write. And it was so fun to kind of use him and Seth's love story to tie up the whole series. So that's the last one. Don't ask me to write another one.
But the spinoff series.
Yeah, maybe someday.
How about you, JD? Who do we get to meet?
So we get to meet Aiden and Dukes, but Aiden is pretty much he kind of takes the limelight pretty much all the time. He is quite a character. He's almost cold, but he has moments of warmth. He's trying to avenge his mother. It's become an obsession. He doesn't want anything else in the world. He has nothing else. He has a mentor that is a dragon, and he's taught him pretty much everything. So he knows that not all dragons are bad. He's not just out to get all dragons, but he does not care to hurt somebody who gets in his way. Like I said, he sounds very cold, but he's warm on the inside. He is, so there's not really a bad guy per se. I mean, there is, like, obviously he's trying to find him, but what he's fighting against more is his obsession, and he has to finally say, okay, I could probably live without revenge in order to have his family. And so it's more, he is fighting against himself, really, and where he thinks he needs to be. And in the end, he gets what he wants to do, but it's no longer the driving force anymore. He has new things to drive him forward.
Nancy?
Well, the light mages, who the series is built around, have been around for thousands of years. And they've been fighting the ghouls who use dark magic, can't breed among themselves, so they kidnap mages and mundanes for that purpose, and can only eat fresh kill. And that went on for several thousand years. And then in the 14th century, the ghouls succeeded in opening a portal in the void between worlds, and demons from the void came through, and they brought the Black Death with them. And so the battle to fight them back took a very long time, and it helped to trigger the burning times, the witch hunts of the 17th century. So that's all background to these people. And ever since then, the ghouls have wanted to bring demons through again and take over the world. So that's kind of what the light mages all have in mind. Griffin knows he didn't choose wisely 6 years ago. 4 of his deputies died as he fought his way out of the room. Another one turned against him and people say Griff killed him. I don't want to go too specific about that. The woman he loved died, and his best friend died. Try and get justice for him. So Griff is all about nobody else is going to risk their life or their safety for me. I won't have it. And as Val begins to realize that many of the things she's always been told about him are not true, they're trying to uncover the truth because rumor has it there's still a traitor on the council of the mage's ruling body. He's always stepping in front of her. And she's like, I have your old job. I can do this. And so that is a problem through the book for them. But while Griff has been out on his own, he put together a team and they go take out ghoul nests. The communities ghouls live in are called nests, and that's where they keep their captives. They steal animals, livestock for food. And there are nests out there that the sheriff's department doesn't know about. And so Griff and his friends are doing this. And I like reading series about groups of friends. I mean, one character steps to the front in this book and then another one in the next book. So I was trying to set up characters who would carry me through at least the first part of the series. So we also meet Griff's friends. And there are people in the town that he's friends with. The town is called Wayfarer. And he's really good friends with Miss Hetty Telfair, a retired hippie lawyer who has a gray braid down to the middle of her back and has the largest golden retriever Griff has ever seen. So Miss Hetty is his friend. There's a town shelter that's loosely modeled on the elementary school I went to when I was growing up. And that's run by a Unitarian minister who seems to have a very odd tolerance for magic. Just doesn't seem to throw him the way it does some people. And so they're the main two characters from the town. And then there's some other people that we meet who are not in good circumstances in the town. And the doctor at the mage's headquarters is also one of Griff's friends. His best friend from his childhood is an archaeologist. And so I was thinking about that when Glenn was talking about his archaeologist character. So there is an archaeology setup later in the series. But Griff is a guy who's always tried to do right, and he let his feelings get the better of him, and he made a tragic mistake. And in this book and going forward, Griff is dealing with the consequences of that mistake. And at the same time, he's falling in love with Val, who's falling in love with him because, hey, it's a romance. And yet his guilt and his acute sense of responsibility are getting in the way. So that's basically who the people in this book and in this series are.
So as we're coming towards wrapping up, I've got one of my favorite questions that I always like to dive into, especially on new books. And Glenn, I can't imagine a better person for this question just to see the look on your face. When you're doing and writing and crafting these kinds of stories, there's always the things that we as writers get to go down as rabbit holes. There's always that thing that we get to find in the research. What's the one thing when you were doing your research for this book that you looked at, whether it made it in the story or not? What's the one thing you looked at and said, okay, yeah, it was the rabbit hole that really sucked you in?
Faster than light travel. That's what almost all science fiction writers who write space opera get into trouble with. So I saw faster than light travel, I guess in the usual way, with technology that I don't explain. And I think that I circumvent the rabbit hole by, talking about it from the perspective of somebody who uses the technology and doesn't know how it works. I don't know how a cell phone works, but I use it every day. I mean, I'm not going to choose an engineer to describe it to the audience. I'm going to use somebody who uses it every day and doesn't know anything about it. So I think I kind of danced around that rabbit hole and didn't fall in. I hope I didn't anyway. There are those who differ with me.
How about you, Beth? What did you discover when you were doing your research for this one?
As always, the rabbit hole for me is the food. I actually have a problem. So like when I'm writing the book, I'll be like, oh, okay, this is, I like to have some kind of recipe that's like a feature of that particular book. Usually it's something that the food truck serves. And sometimes I don't want to stop when I'm writing to do the research of like, I'm a fairly competent cook myself, and I like to cook. And so I can usually approximate what it is. Then like the point comes when like I said, I do cooking lives and stuff, and I have recipe cards and recipes that I print, and I want people to be able to duplicate the recipe. Well, sometimes it doesn't quite go as planned, and it's like, well, okay, I guess this is the book and this is this, and it's a little bit different. You'd think that I would learn after writing like at least 11 or 12 books with food in them to like do the research on the recipe first. But I have never learned to do that. So I guess I won't be anytime soon now, but.
How about you, JD? What was your big rabbit hole?
Honestly, location, and it's more because I am like, I love the globe. And so whenever I was looking for a location, it was like a lot of Google Maps, like trying to find a good place that would have like not much around it. And then of course I'm getting lost and kind of going other places. And I'm like, oh, that's really, and so not anything research wise, really more. I just got a little distracted by the map.
So Nancy, other than slogging through the Okefenokee swamp.
Yes, which we will note that the characters do not actually do. The thing that it wasn't so much a rabbit hole as it really intrigued me is that I've always loved quarterstaffs. There's that scene in the Errol Flynn Robin Hood movie where he and Alan Hale Jr. are fighting with the quarterstaffs on the bridge. I've always loved that. And I thought Griff is going to carry a freaking quarterstaff because that's all there is to it. Because the mages don't carry firearms. They use bladed weapons because you can channel magic through them, with the exception of Griff, which is one of the things that sets him apart from others. And I thought, if he had runes on that quarterstaff and he was channeling magic through the runes and different runes did different things, that could be fun to play with. So I bought a bag of runes. I bought a couple of books about runes. I read them. It was just, I could not tell you anymore. That it's like with a lot of research things, it went in here and then it went out there when I was done with it. But I've still got the books and I've still got the little bag of runes, so I can go back to that if I need to. And now that I'm writing Griff and his staff again, I probably will need to. But the real rabbit hole I fell down was not in this book. It was in Warrior Mage, which will be out toward the end of this year because that's the one with the archaeologist hero. And there are islands all through the Okefenokee. It's not just a mass of wet, peaty soil. There are islands that people have lived on, in some cases thousands of years ago. And the Seminoles actually took refuge in the Okefenokee from the U.S. Army in the mid-1800s. And there was in the early 1900s, there was a logging operation in the swamp, unfortunately killing a lot of the old-growth cypress. But there's an island called Billy's Island that actually has a Native American burial mound on it. And I visited that island on a research trip. And that got me interested in archaeology in the Okefenokee. And the water level is so high. Is the water table on the landmass that high? If you're a geology major, you probably know the answer to that. I was a history major. I don't know the answer to that. So I actually was able to find a couple of archaeologists who had conducted excavations in the Okefenokee and an archaeologist who had worked with Native American sites. And so this spun into a whole thing that's going to appear later in the series. But finally I thought, okay, you have words to put on the page. You need to stop diving around and wallowing in this and put words on the page, and then you can come back to that later. So the runes were fascinating, and the archaeology really did threaten to suck me totally in.
So, go ahead.
And Jim?
Yeah.
She just triggered something for me. One of the things that I did get sucked in research was in search of Howard Cove, Maine. So that's in northeastern Maine. I landed in Portland, Maine, and decided I was going to take a day trip to Howard Cove. That's a long freaking state. We don't think about Maine being Maine is huge. I was driving all dang day, and I only got about halfway to Howard Cove. So I said, screw it, Google Maps. JD, I get you. Google Maps. I mean, I never got to Howard Cove. I was looking for a tavern, to represent the opening of the book. And I just knew there just had to be a tavern there. I just couldn't get there.
That's like a day trip between the Outer Banks and Asheville in North Carolina, along the long axis of the state.
Yeah.
That's a long drive. I've done that drive. I live in North Carolina, so.
Yeah. Whenever you look at a map, just remember, Mercator maps lie.
Well, it's especially weird when I used to work for a company, it was a German-owned company, and we would get people who would come over, for one day for business. And they were like, there was one guy came in, he had a 10 o'clock meeting in our office here in Atlanta. And he says, hey, my flight's at 6. Can we drive up to New York real quick? Because they couldn't fathom, because from where he lives, 2 hours, you're in another country. He could not fathom the distance.
Well, it's only this big on the map.
So, yeah. And so that was big culture shock for him.
And you're like, 2 hours, that won't even get you out of Atlanta.
Yeah, I don't get out of Georgia in 2 hours. Yeah. So, out of Atlanta, 2 hours, you're lucky if you've gone 2 miles.
So what was your big rabbit hole, Bobby?
I have a really good one for this one. When I wrote Evil Ways, all of my FBI knowledge came from movies, TVs, and Google. I was working as an actor. I worked on the pilot of this TV show called The Following, where Kevin Bacon plays an FBI agent. And so I play an FBI agent in the pilot. And at this point, I have started working on the second book. And there was a real life FBI agent who was there as a technical advisor. And there was one point where we're standing around doing nothing. So I sidled up to him, introduced myself, and said, told him who I was, what I did. I said, I'd love to ask you some questions. So he gave me his card. I had to call, with the FBI, they crawl up all in your background checks and all this stuff. But after it was all approved, I got to go spend a day with the FBI, which was, they said, the lady on the front said, we can give you an hour. So I'm like, okay. So I go to the Atlanta field office. I'm there to be there an hour. And I ended up being there all day. They were wonderful. I mean, it's there's just a little cool things like that. I learned a lot of technical stuff. I learned a lot of very interesting tidbits of just how the FBI works, why the field office is where it is, how they do things. One of the cool things was and it's an office building. I mean, it's not like it's an office building, but we were walking down this one corridor, and how a lot of times there's little alcoves they build into corridors. Usually there's couches or chairs or whatever. The FBI has a trophy room, like Batman. They have a trophy room of various things from various crimes. And so this being the Atlanta office, the bomb that blew up in Centennial Olympic Park was right there where they put it back together to see how it worked. There's all kinds of just cool stuff like that. And he's pointing out and telling me, we caught the guy because he used this payphone. So we just ripped this payphone up out of the ground and now it's in our trophy room. And there was just a lot of that. So it's a really cool day of just seeing how they do things. And so, but we ended the day, I'm talking to him, or I'm asking him general questions about being an FBI agent. And so he goes, well, what's your book about? And so I start telling him the plot. And I said, at the end of the first book, our hero gets shot. So I'm curious. I'm going to start the next one out with afterwards, dealing with being shot, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes, oh, well, let me tell you about the time I got shot. This was a 30-minute story, and most of it went in my book. It was just fascinating, the stories he was telling. And, and because my story deals with the task force, he says, hey, we've got one of those upstairs. Come on. So we go upstairs and he goes, okay, don't tell them you're a writer. I'm like, why? He goes, because you're going to say writer, they're going to hear reporter, and they're not going to talk to you. So you're just visiting from, and I'm like, okay. So then I go up and lie to the room full of, a room full of federal agents. But it was fascinating. It was such a cool day and very fascinating. And I have mined a lot of tidbits from that day in more than one book, just little things that were just so cool. And since then, I've also gotten to, I've discovered, and you guys probably already know this, I'm sure, but I've discovered that people love to talk about their jobs. So I've got to meet and talk with Secret Service agents. I've talked with SWAT team guys, fire people in fire. I was supposed to, right before the quarantine happened, I was supposed to go visit with a medical examiner. We're going to reschedule that one of these days. Once we get out of this here apocalypse, we're going to schedule that. But I've discovered that people love to tell you about what they do, and you can get a lot of firsthand knowledge just by asking, hey, would you be willing to talk about it, or could I shadow you? I'm amazed how I hear, yeah, sure, let's do it, more often than I hear, no, we can't do that. And it's just, those are the rabbit holes that are more fun to go down, because it is a hands-on, you're there, you're experiencing it, as opposed to just when I'm looking stuff up on Google. So yeah, so that was probably my favorite from Evil Intent, was spending a day with the FBI.
And not in cuffs.
And not in cuffs, yes. And I know too, I'm on their list, because I know they checked me out forward and backwards. But it was just, like I said, it was a wonderful experience, and and I have Kevin Bacon to thank for it. So there's that too. If I hadn't have been there, working on that TV show that day, I wouldn't have met the guy.
But always beware. If you're working somewhere, a writer will ask you a question.
And it's so weird. It's sometimes we find them by mistake. We were at, I forget the con. It doesn't matter. I was at a con. John Hartness, me and Andrea Judy and John Hartness were all just hanging around Hartness's table. And this guy comes up, and he's looking at the book. So Andrea and I just kind of are chatting. Somehow we find out that this guy is a forensic photographer, and we spent like 20 minutes peppering him with questions. Where he was just like, "Look, I'm here to buy books, dude." but he was very happy. He answered a bunch of questions. He says, "Yeah, usually when I tell people what I do, they're like, ooh, And Hartness is like, "What do they smell like?" So, anybody that knows John, that's not a weird question from him.
That's not a weird question from him at all.
Yeah. But it is amazing that you can learn a lot. And I think I learn more from doing it that way, from talking to people than when I, certainly I can look it up and fake it, but yeah, there is something special about doing it for, like, even when you travel, like you guys were talking about traveling and maps, even doing that, there's more of a tactile sense, driving to try to find that pub, what the road felt like, or what the grass smelled like, or the trees, or just there's a feeling there that I think makes that research for the background of the story work a lot better, because you're getting it in more senses.
Well, guys, I appreciate everybody coming to join and hang out this evening and talking about all the new fun releases and getting ready to load up that to be read pile. But before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you, website, social media, all that kind of good stuff, and remind everybody what that new release title is. So, Beth, I'm going to go back in reverse order. So you're up first.
So this is the new release. It's called Ride or Die. This is the 6th book. You could start here, but I would much more recommend starting with Drive Me Crazy, which is the first one. You can find me at bethbolden.com, on Facebook at Beth Bolden, Instagram, Beth Bolden Author. I really love Instagram, so I'm there a lot, and also on Facebook. So I'd love to see you and hang out with you. So come join me.
Glenn?
Well, let me see if I can do it this way. There you go.
There we go.
Of course, it's backwards. But Dragon's Heir is my book coming out in May 4th. May the 4th be with you. And you can get that on Amazon or Barnes & Nobles. It's Outland Entertainment, the publisher. And you can find me on glennparris.com. And you can also find Dragon's Air as one of the web pages on the site.
Bobby?
BobbyNash.com is my website. I published Evil Ways in the second time, and then Evil Intent through Ben Books, which is my imprint. That's ben-books.com. I'm on Facebook at author Bobby Nash. I'm at Bobby Nash on Twitter, and I'm Bobby Nash Writes on Instagram.
Nancy?
My website is nancynorthcott.com. The easiest way to connect with me on social media is by Twitter, where I spend far more time than is good for me, and I am at Nancy Northcott. By the time you actually see this, the 3 large books on one side will all be out, and they will be on all ebook platforms, and there'll be paper editions available. And the 2 short stories that are down there together are out now, but they're Christmas stories. So yeah, you might want to get Christmas in the spring or wait till Christmas. But anyway, those will all be out by the time you see this. And I guess that's it.
And JD?
You can find me at jdlightbooks.com, on Facebook, JD Light. I have a group, JD's Cluster FK. And then my books, right now, Scorched is out. Scalded should be out by the time I'm hoping that this comes out. So, yeah.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host tonight, Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamesvnettles.com, authoressentials.net, and of course, here at ConTinual. And we will see everybody again soon.